And just so I don't forget to say it before lunch, we do have a bill up today. I don't have a calendar on my desk, but Representative Anthony is reporting.
217.
Thank you. I'm going to try to say that every morning. So if I forget, remind me. Damian.
Okay. Thank you. So we're back on page 27 at section 2057. And the good news about section 2057 is there are no changes. Section 2058 on page 29.
Well played.
So 2058, this is the elective coverage for a self-employed individual. There was a question raised earlier on during the walkthrough about whether we could make it more clear when a self-employed individual would be eligible to obtain benefits. So I've added this new language in subdivision A2 that says after electing to obtain coverage, an employed or an enrolled self-employed individual shall, if otherwise eligible, be able to receive benefits after paying contributions in 2 calendar quarters within a 4 calendar quarter period. So just clarifies there that you'll be eligible at that point. Sound good? Great. I see smiles, so I'm just going to go with it. I don't know if they're related to that.
Yes, Representative Anthony.
It's not a technical, I apologize, but I remember asking Joyce if in other states there was an obligation to continue for a duration so that you couldn't opt in, take a thing, and then opt out.
So let's save that since it's
Okay,
not
sure.
technical.
And I don't see the language, it may be later, but.
Yep, it's right here on page 30, lines 3 through 5. Initial 3-year period.
Okay.
And it does occur before that. And then, but we talk about the initial 3-year period that you have to opt in for in multiple locations.
Okay.
All right, that brings us to the private plan for employers, which for the most part has not changed. But the question came up earlier about what about employees who cease to become covered by a private plan, not because their employer or the employer's insurer mismanaged the private plan and the approval was terminated, but because the employer goes out of business, the employee transfers jobs, et cetera. So what we've said here is an employee who ceases to be covered by an approved private plan shall, for purposes of determining eligibility for benefits, be treated as if the employee had earned wages from which contributions were withheld during the period of the employee's employment with the employer. That is a lot of employing, but unfortunately that's our current drafting standard to avoid using gendered references. So number 2 is we say that for purposes of this subsection, an employee ceases to be covered by a private plan if, and you'll notice there are some things that are not covered here. So first, the employee separates from employment with the employer due to a layoff or the end of seasonal employment with the employer. So you can be eligible for coverage if you worked for a private employer and you had seasonal employment with them, and then you go to work for an employer that's covered under the state program. You'll notice this doesn't cover separations that are voluntary. So if the employee chooses to end the employment relationship and it's not due to seasonal employment or a layoff, this doesn't cover that. The employer terminates the employer's private plan as provided in the section. So that's the employer goes back to the state and says, I've chosen to go into the public program. Let's terminate the approval. C is the approval is terminated by the director. That's what was in the House General version. And D, the employer becomes insolvent or ceases to do business in Vermont. So bankruptcy, or the employer has ceased business. Either the employer shut its doors completely or they've closed up their Vermont location. So
Nothing gets a little weedy of transferring any accumulated from the private plan into the state coffers.
So we've taken that out.
It's complicated.
The reason we've taken that out is because of concerns under, it was in the original bill as introduced. We have concerns that that may conflict with federal law under ERISA and the rate requirements for trusts and so forth under that law. And so only one state has that on its books. And to the best of my knowledge, that hasn't yet been decided by a court whether they can require that.
Okay.
And so rather than having a potential conflict between ERISA and state law, which will always be settled in favor of the federal law, we just took it out.
Eat the loss, yeah.
Right. So this would socialize that loss. I think, you know, it's hard for me to quantify this. I don't even know if there's really a way that JFO could quantify it. I think in the states that most states have the option for a private plan. It's hard to do an apples to apples comparison though, because of the way, so we have the 4 states that originally had the disability insurance laws. New York's was treated like workers' compensation law. New York's a big enough state where they've always had a state workers' compensation insurance option, and you could get your disability insurance through that. California, Rhode Island, and New Jersey treated it as being part of their unemployment compensation law, and they had the private plan, but they had somewhat different requirements, and I don't know that those would translate with their experience. I'm sure we could ask them what they've had, but none of them require paying into the state fund if your private plan is dissolved. Some of them don't provide this protection for employees though, so that's the other question. And the states that do provide it that are newer probably don't have enough experience for us to really say this is going to have a big hit or a small hit. So it is a policy question, but I don't know if we've got the data. Plus that's out of my wheelhouse. It's really JFO's thing. So I shouldn't speculate.
Representative Taylor?
If a business goes out of business, so the employees are no longer employed.
Yep.
They can apply for.
So the idea here is that if the employee, so they are treated as if they've paid contributions into the state program, assuming they meet the other state program eligibility requirements, they're treated as if they've been paying contributions in. So when they move to that new job, or if they already met their eligibility and they've just lost their job and had this qualifying event, we're saying the state program would step in here. So there is that instance where an employee could meet the qualifying events. And this is basically saying, if you haven't paid in contributions, but it's because you worked for a private employer who has ceased to cover you under their private plan for one of these 4 reasons, will cover you under the state plan, assuming you've got enough time with that private employer.
But if you're with the public plan, your employee, everything's fine, but your business goes out of business, then you're.
So that employee is fine because what we tie up to is the employee's contributions to the contributions tied to that employee, not the employee's contributions, but the contributions paid with respect to that employee is what determines whether they've had enough payment into the plan to be eligible to take benefits.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah. So, all right. Next section, appeals. I don't think we made any changes here. Fraud, no changes there. Overpayments, no changes there. Rulemaking, no changes there. Confidentiality, no changes there. Disqualifications. We did make a change here because there was the question of, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, page 40.
It's on the top left if you squint.
Yep, page 40, section 2065. I should remember to say it because I know my eyesight, if I was sitting at your end of the table, may not give me that number. So in B here, so there was the question about what about allowing employers to basically bring people up to what they were earning before. So if you have an employee, right now the max works out to an employee who earns somewhere between 50 and 55,000 a year. So you have an employee who earns 75,000 a year, they're on the state program, and as an employer, you'd rather pay that increment from their max weekly benefit in the state to what they made before than pay them out of a private plan that gives them full wage replacement or something like that. So this basically says an individual shall be disqualified from receiving benefits for any day in which they receive remuneration that would, in combination with the benefits provided pursuant to this chapter, result in the individual receiving more than the individual's average daily wage on a single day or the individual's average weekly wage during the course of a calendar week. So we're basically saying you can't game the system by paying them a little bit on Sunday so that over the course of 7 days they make more in a week than they would have if you were paying them Monday through Friday, something like that. And then in 2, we say an employer may provide an employee with additional income to supplement the amount of benefits provided pursuant to this chapter, provided the sum of that does not exceed the employee's average daily wage or the employee's average weekly wage. As used in this subsection, an average daily wage is 1/5 of the average weekly wage. So this is for simplicity. Rather than trying to figure out how many days a week an employee works and how many hours they work, et cetera, we say take the weekly wage, divide by 5. And then average weekly wage is the sum of the qualified individual's wages during the previous calendar year divided by 52. Provided those wages are being used for determining the amount of the individual's benefits, or the sum of their documented wages during the 2 highest calendar quarters divided by 26, if those are the ones being used to calculate benefits.
So I just want to make sure I understand this. Does this suggest that if my employer wants to pay me in addition to the benefits I might be receiving through the state program, that they can pay me up to my full wage and I can also receive the leave?
They can pay you the difference between the leave pay and your full wage.
I suspected that was the case, but I didn't.
Which might actually be an easier way to phrase this now that I think about it. So I'm going to flag this as see if you can make it more clear.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anthony.
Damien, you're not, in this case, in the use of the word wage, you're not going to fuss about the 10% that goes to FICA and SS.
Well, so we'll get to the definition of wages later.
Okay.
All right, so I've just flagged that section to take another shot and clarify it a little bit. So,
And self-employed folks in this definition?
self-employed folks are not in this definition because we're only concerned about your wages. A self-employed person wants to somehow pay themselves. Like this is just worried about, this was the disqualification if your employer is paying you sick leave or wages. And the question was, well, you know, so if hypothetically, yeah, your benefit is like a half day's earnings for you or a half a week's earnings, couldn't you just use 20 hours of sick leave to make up the difference? And this is saying, yes, you can, as long as you don't go over that amount. And I realized that I left in a definition of remuneration here, which we don't need. So that's at the bottom of the page, and that's just going to come out.
Okay,
So
thanks.
I think, I'll check. Oh, no, that does stay in. Never mind, because we use it above, so.
Thought we could get down to 63 pages instead of 4.
Oh, we might still get down to 63. We'll get there. Okay. We're going to skip all the way up to page 43, section 2068. We're just going at record pace here, guys. This is really good work.
Representative Maslin.
Oh, we're going at a record pace. I commend you for keeping track of this stuff.
Really.
I'm glad it's your bailiwick and not mine, you know?
Yeah, well, don't worry. It will, if you ask me about this 2 days after the session ends, I will have forgotten every detail of the bill. So
That makes me feel better.
Good.
it goes in and it goes right back out again. Right, so this language here changed. Previous to this, we had C1 and 2 plus a subsection E. C1 was family and medical leave and qualifying exigencies. C2 was safe leave and E was bereavement leave. Because we've grouped them all together now in section 472, we can just have this one subdivision that says you're entitled to the all rights and protections. And then we've added the language at the end to clarify to which the employee would otherwise be entitled. So if for some reason you don't qualify for some of those rights and protections, you don't get them. So that was pointed out by one of the advocates. They were confused about whether we were providing additional rights or whether we were just saying you just get whatever you'd be entitled to under those laws. And that was the intent. So we've added that language. Questions? Okay. The next is the annual report. This is brand new language. So this is requiring an annual report on or before February 15th of each year, which gives 45 days to pull the numbers together from the year. The director is required to publish a report regarding the usage of the program in the prior year, including claims, percentage, claims approved, claims denied, broken down by why they were denied, percentage of claims attributable to each eligible reason for leave, average benefits, average length of leave broken down by the reasons for leave, total number of enrolled self-employed individuals, and then the total number of employees and self-employed individuals in the program, both as a number and as a percentage of working Vermonters. Gross benefits paid by the program and changes in comparison to prior years. And then the average time required to process a claim and an appeal, as well as the average time from when you file your application to when you get a determination of your benefits.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Do we care about reversals on appeal? Because you get the total number that have been appealed, but you don't know the outcome. You know the reason why they're appealed, but.
Yeah, that's a policy question.
Yeah,
I
as a quality
So
control.
let's save that as a flag for when we're done going through the bill.
Yep, okay. I am just going to make a note. Okay. Yeah, so this is an amalgam of reporting language from a couple different states. And it just gives you a picture of how's the program being used. Is it changing year to year? And are there potential problems that reasons for denial? If you look at some of the other states, it's really interesting, some of the reasons for denial that crop up. In one state, I think it was Connecticut, there was a very high number of people who weren't providing the right documentation. So that sort of thing could point to, we need to do better education. We need to provide more flexibility. So there could be different things at play there, but it can drive the questions you ask. And then C requires all the information to be further broken down by demographic information, including age, gender, race, ethnicity, income, geographic distribution by county and occupation. This is, of course, voluntary information when we collect this on applications. So you're going to have people who just don't answer, but this will give you a rough picture of your demographics for who's taking leave. Are we seeing that, Southern Vermont, for example, is using a lot more leave than Northern Vermont, or, and then we can start again asking questions about why is that? Is there a reason driving the utilization in some parts of the state versus others?
This is section 6, right? Section 6?
No. This is a new section on page 44.
So when does this take effect?
This takes effect July 1 of this year. So that's actually a good point. It should say beginning with February 15th of 2027 and annually thereafter. Thank you.
Why February 15th?
I picked it to give them 45 days from the end of the year. It could be any day that you want. It could be January 15th. It's really up to you. Other states I've seen do it like by the fiscal year, and then they have the report come out in the fall.
I love that. Oh, I'm not following my own discipline. That's a policy
Okay.
concern, excuse me. Thank you.
Okay, we can return to that. Definitions. All right, we're about to get a little weedy, so bear with me. So the first change here is average weekly wages. We've added that calculation in A of wages paid during the prior calendar year. This is because tax does not track by social security number until the end of the year. So we start with prior calendar year and we'll look at the full year by 52. And then if you don't have prior calendar year wages, you can use 2 calendar quarters from the last 4 and provide documentation of your wages.
And Damien, this is a mechanism we use in other places in state government.
It is similar to what we use for things like CCFAP, Child Care Financial Assistance. There is actually no language on that. That's a procedural thing. So this was the language we came up with, but it is similar to what we use for those. Getting down to domestic partner, just like above, we've spelled it out. And we're using the words individual and qualified individual instead of employee and individual, but otherwise identical. Moving on to page, going down here to, oh, there we go. Page 51. I changed the wording for qualifying exigency slightly just to be a little bit more clear. So it's a qualifying exigency identified pursuant to federal regulations related to active duty service by a family member in the U.S. Armed Forces. I forget how I worded it before, but I was struggling with the wording and this seemed more clear. And that's identical to what we have in the sections 1 and 4. Moving on to page 53. This is probably the biggest definition change in the bill because we've gone away from the Internal Revenue Code definition, which cross-referenced a 4-page definition of wages. And we've moved down to this, which says wages means all remuneration paid by an employer to an employee for service or work performed by the employee, including salaries, tips, commissions, bonuses, and cash value of any remuneration paid in a medium other than cash. Your employer gives you a car. What's the cash value of that car? Reasonable cash value shall be estimated and determined in accordance with rules adopted pursuant to the unemployment insurance law, which has this existing language in it. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. Employers already have to do this when they file their quarterly unemployment insurance reports. So this is not requiring them to do something different. Wages shall not include, and A is basically health plans or any other sorts of plans or annuities or insurance that are related to sickness, accident, disability, medical or hospitalization expenses, or death. So life insurance, health insurance, and short-term disability insurance, et cetera, not included in wages. And then payments on account of sickness, accident, or disability, or medical or hospitalization expenses made by an employer to or on behalf of an employee more than 6 months after the last calendar month in which the employee worked for the employer. So these are, again, payments that are made based on someone who worked for you a long time ago. This is like a workers' compensation type of thing. So we're looking back at that. And then finally, C is retirement plans under section 401 or 403 of the IRC, Internal Revenue Code. So 403Bs, 401Ks, et cetera.
Under large A,
Yep.
page 53, 16, line 16, that chunk, you have a whole bunch of ors, and then you have an or both at the end. That or both refers to which two?
Well, thank you for that question. Let me figure that out. So
He deserves some sort
insurance,
No, we'll get him.
Under
of
pressure.
badge, like
it is for the
wordsmith.
employer's employees or the employee's dependents, or both. So employees, their dependents, or both. And that actually,
So it's the most recent two ors that the both refers to. Is that kind of the rule?
yes. Yeah, it with the offsetting commas there, it adjusts the phrase before it.
Okay.
And I would, I'm gonna wordsmith that a little bit, just so that there's less employ variations.
Representative Anton?
Maybe this is just an editing difference. I always thought that if you put a comma ahead of the or, you're implying the elimination of the both. But if you don't have a comma, it's assumed that it also reads as or both. And yet you've got a comma and you're using or both.
Belts and suspenders.
I think we can leave.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Let's leave Damien to figure that out.
So
Don't have to do that here.
Okay.
just, I will run this past our editors. So what I would say is that to some extent, it probably depends on which style guide you're following.
Okay.
But I will run it by them and ask them to confirm that we've done it correctly. So, again, I am not a grammar expert, so I will defer to them and if I get the approval that it's within our drafting guidelines, then we'll go with that.
I really like lists rather than long sentences with ors and ands and
And I can do that if you'd like a list.
I think you are the writer.
Whatever
And so
you
if we
think is-
can understand your writing
I am the writer,
and we
but it
have
is your
understood.
bill.
It is, yes.
So
I agree with him with the list.
let me see if I can make that work.
A little I, et cetera.
Yes, that's how I feel.
I've got a note in there. So that is the definition of wages. So what this includes now is this captures wages paid to individuals that might be exempt from the federal income tax definition of wages. The individuals are still what we would think of as an employee receiving wages from an employer. This is not going to capture independent contractors who are under the self-employed rubric here. So when it doesn't wade into that, it gets into more of nuances of the Internal Revenue Code that Congress in its wisdom has decided to add to that very simple code.
I have a self-employment question that's more referencing previous stuff than right.
Want to go back?
Irrelevant. No, you don't have to scroll.
Okay.
It's more hypothetical. So if someone is a business owner of an S corp, would they be considered a self-employed person and paying in full that way? Or would they be considered both an employer and an employee and paying the full share that way? And does it even matter? But there's no chance that they would be paying sort of twice.
The bottom line at the end of the day is, are they paying themselves wages or is it some form of pass-through income from their business to them? If they're paying themselves wages, they're considered an employee. They're still paying both the employer and the employee share. If they're paying themselves with some other form of pass-through business income, they're considered self-employed.
But in both cases, they would be paying the full 50.
In both cases, they're paying the full amount. So if you're a business owner, you're stuck paying both halves.
Great.
So.
Representative Sims.
In this definition sections, what is the section that defines how we look at that self-employed income?
So we define self-employed individual on page 52. And we define them as a sole proprietor or partner owner of an unincorporated business, the sole member of an LLC, or the sole shareholder of a corporation. And corporation includes S corps, B corps. And
where do we get how we define what their net income is? Like earlier it was.
So self-employment income uses the definition from the Internal Revenue Code. So whatever the Internal Revenue Code includes as self-employment income under section 1402 of the Internal Revenue Code is included. And it's basically all income from your business.
And you mentioned the documentation guidelines would be set by the department.
Right. So what's going to happen for self-employed individuals is you're either going to be relying on, and this is left to some extent to rulemaking. So, but the way the bill is set up, you can rely on your past year's self-employment income, or you can rely on documented income from 2 of the last 4 calendar quarters.
And is that language somewhere in the bill?
That is in the eligibility. It says either last year's income divided by 52 to determine your average wage, or this year's or 2 of the last 4 calendar quarters divided by 26.
And that was that,
Provided.
sort of you creating the CCFAP language that's in.
Yes. Yeah. So, but yeah, there is some gray area that we've left to rulemaking to allow tax and the new division to figure out the best way to implement that, whether they give self-employed individuals the option of filing estimated payments and relying on last year's income, or the requirement that they document everything like unemployment insurance and do a quarterly payment based off that documentation with a possible true up at the end of the year if they find that revenue was included in the wrong quarter or something like that.
Representative Sims, are you?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, you're clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Representative Anthony, and then I want to finish walking through the bill.
Just real quick, back to my 90%. Remember, you said, in the definition of wages, we will account for the reference to 90% of benefit level is only 90%.
Yeah, so it's 90% of your wages. It doesn't include.
Yeah, but here, there's nothing in this definition.
No, so we're saying I thought your question was about, well, what are wages? So
No.
we're looking at 90% of salary, tips, commission, bonuses, not looking at retirement,
Okay.
health insurance, et cetera. So that's basically the compensation you get, salary, tips, bonuses, and then any sort of compensation in kind, whether it's a car, an apartment,
Okay.
clothing, something like that, tools from your employer. We're not looking though at what they pay for your insurance, or anything like that.
Okay.
So. Okay. So that, we can now skip ahead to education and outreach, section 8, starting at the bottom of 55. So the first thing I want to say on line 20, we say during the period from June 1, 2025 to May 31, 2026. So what I've done is go 7 months before benefits start, 1 month before payments of contributions start, to 5 months after benefits start for this. These are placeholder dates. You can set them wherever you want. I just picked some dates. The division shall offer monthly informational sessions to employers, employees, and self-employed individuals. The director shall ensure that the sessions are available to both individuals attending in person and to individuals who are not physically present. And then we've used language that's based on our remote town meetings law. So using technology that permits attendance through electronic means, allowing access by telephone, which you can do through Zoom, and then posting information that allows individuals to directly access and participate in providing that information on the website and any public notice for a session. So this is basically saying they have to do a monthly session that's sort of an informational session to answer questions and talk about the program for these 3 groups. So 3 sessions a month, and it has to be available in person and online. And this was requested to provide better outreach than just information on the website that might not answer all your questions. Sessions for employers shall be developed in consultation with tax and shall be designed to educate employers regarding their rights and obligations and include information regarding resources available through the division and the Department of Taxes. Sessions for employees, also developed in consultation with tax, and they include information about the tax credit section that we're going to get to in a minute, and resources available. Self-employed individuals, same as employees. The reason I've separated all 3 of them out is because we may have different concerns we want to map out for them, so that's just set up. That is it for the new language there. Are there questions on that outreach? Okay. The adequacy of reserves report, I've updated the dates here to reflect the proposed change dates for the program. Again, these can change as program dates change. Private plans, initial approval. So this reflects the proposal that's at the end of the bill to make benefits effective on January 1, 2026. So this is just changing dates to reflect that. Otherwise, the timeline is the exact same for employers. They just have to begin providing benefits on or before January 1, 2026. And they're, other than that, they're exempt from withholding, et cetera. Appropriations. This is one that I'm sure everyone's been waiting for. So 35.1 million appropriated to the Division of Family and Medical Leave for fiscal years 24, 25, and 26 to be deposited in the special fund and used to establish the program. 5.1.
Just jump in. The way that's worded, to me, it doesn't feel clear that that's 35 million for the entire period versus annually. So I don't know if there's a.
It's the amount and what fiscal years you can use it in is how we draft it.
Okay.
So if we wanted to appropriate it separately, we would say 35 million for 24, 35 for 25. The reason I've written it this way is because the amounts were a little bit vague on the projection. So my expectation is that as those get refined, this may break out into fiscal years. Or we may also hear from your colleagues, they're not across the hall anymore. Sorry, going back a couple of years now. Your colleagues downstairs that they want to only do the 24 appropriation now, and
I think it's likely that they want to do the whole thing this year.
so, right. So this is appropriating it all. My guess is they'll tweak this language because I've never had an appropriation they haven't adjusted. And then the last piece here, this is the 97.1 million transferred from the general fund to the special fund for the cost of operating the program during calendar year 2026 and the maintenance of the reserve required pursuant to 21 VSA 2053B. So this is the 97.1 million we need to make up the gap between contributions from July 1, 25 to January 1, 26. And what's actually needed to have the reserve required and 12 months of operating funds in the fund.
And so that appropriation could be, so the sort of lever to reduce that appropriation is to have the program start later while reserves are built and let reserves build up for longer.
Yep, and this reflects also if you keep the tax credit that's in the end of the bill. This reflects the tax credit. This amount would go down if you take that out. This amount would disappear if you delayed start by a year. And then anywhere in the middle, it's going to adjust accordingly. So that's just something to keep in mind. So section 12, this is a placeholder section. Same with section 13. These are positions because I don't have specificity. Are you okay? Okay. Because we don't have specificity from the department and the treasurer's office yet on the positions. The only position filled in is one full-time exempt director. We know there's a number of FTEs they're expecting. I just don't know what the breakdown is. So once I get that, I can update this. And that might shorten the bill a bit. And then there's also limited service positions. I've added section 14, which I realized I didn't have a requirement that buildings and general services allocate space by a certain date. So we're requiring them to do it by September 30th so that they can have an office to work out of. Income tax credit here. Abby is better situated to answer technical questions. But this, in short version, this is a tiered tax credit. If your annual total covered wages, covered work income is less than 15,000, you're entitled to a $40 credit on your income taxes. And if it's 15,000 to 25,000, it's a $70 credit. And those amounts are inflation adjusted each year. And then the amount necessary is transferred from the special fund into the general fund to pay those credits. So this wouldn't be a hit on the general fund. And then covered work income, all of these things have a cross-reference to an existing definition. And then statutory purpose language in section 16. And then we get to the effective dates, and I finished with 7 minutes to spare.
Thank you. Damon, can you remind me where, I think I just lost track of it, the period, the number of days that the Family Medical Leave Office has to approve an application?
Yeah, that is in, it's under the application section, which off the top of my head, I can't remember the number. It is way back, 2056, starting on page 26. And it's 5 days, 5 business days with 15 additional days if necessary.
I think we want to tweak that based on some feedback that we got.
From Connecticut.
So if you could, just come back to. Thank you.
Right.
Does anyone else have any clarifying questions for us? Or, and then we can pick up policy questions on our next round. I think we flagged most of them. And then at some point, it would be very helpful for me to have all of the different dates in the bill lined up in some sort of table format.
This committee and their table.
And if you don't,
charts.
Damien, if you don't want to do that, I can find someone else to do.
No, I can get that.
Okay. That's not necessary for tomorrow. It just would be really, I think that would be very helpful because there's a lot of sort of moving parts that all have different dates attached. I think it's hard to get your head around.
Yep.
Particularly sort of that startup period when we're collecting money, but the program hasn't started yet and how the other ones.
Yeah. Oh, I've got an idea for a chart.
Great. Good.
I'm horrible at charts though, so you guys might not like it.
Oh, I've liked your other charts. Any other flags before we, yeah.
Would that include like expectations on our part or our successors' part for various pieces to be in place by tax and et cetera? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I think
and
that's doubly important.
yeah. And the, you know, when the outreach starts and when the program starts and all that stuff. All the dates. Yeah, when the money's transferred, all the dates. Okay, I think with that, we are all gonna go eat lunch, I hope. And then we're gonna go to the floor at 1. We have one bill up for action with Representative Anthony. And then we'll be back here after the floor, depending on how long the floor takes, we might